The ornate iron gates of the Sterling estate didn't just close, they sealed a world behind them. One moment, Isla Hayes was the mistress of a sprawling stone mansion, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her 5-month pregnancy. The next, she was standing on a rain-slicked curb with nothing but a cashmere coat and a crocodile leather handbag, the click of the lock echoing the shattering of her life. Her husband's words, as cold and hard as the diamonds on his watch, replayed in her mind. The child is a complication, and you are a liability. The rain began as a whisper, a fine mist that clung to Isla's lashes and chilled the tears on her cheeks. Inside, the mansion had been a fortress of suffocating silence. Declan hadn't shouted. Shouting was for the unsophisticated, the emotionally incontinent. His cruelty was a quieter, more devastating art form. He stood before the grand fireplace, the flames dancing in his polished Oxford shoes, but offering no warmth to his eyes. They were the color of slate, and just as impenetrable. "I think it's best you leave tonight, Isla." Her heart, which had been hammering against her ribs, seemed to stop altogether. "Leave? Declan, what are you talking about? My clothes, my things, the nursery?" She had spent the last month picking out paint colors, soft shades of sage and cream. "They're just things," he said, taking a sip of his Macallan 18. "They can be replaced. You, as it turns out, can be as well." From the arched doorway leading to the conservatory, his mother, Genevieve Sterling, emerged. She was a woman sculpted from ice, her silver hair pulled into a chignon so tight it seemed to pull her face taut, erasing any hint of softness. She held a file in her hands. "Declan is right. Your purpose in this family has been fulfilled, and now it has become messy." "Purpose?" Isla's voice was a raw whisper. The room, with its soaring ceilings and priceless art, felt like it was shrinking, the air growing thin. "I'm your wife. We're having a baby." Declan let out a short, humorless laugh. "Are we? That's the question, isn't it?" He gestured to the file in his mother's hands. "We had a background check revisited. A few inconsistencies, old boyfriends, a trip to Italy you took before we were engaged. How can I be sure the Sterling legacy will be passed to a Sterling heir?" The accusation was so vile, so surgically precise in its cruelty, that Isla felt the air leave her lungs. It was a lie, a monstrous, fabricated lie. She had loved him with a purity that now felt staggeringly naive. She had given up her burgeoning career as an architectural restorer, moved away from her friends, and molded her life to fit the precise, demanding contours of his. For this, to be called a whore in her own home. "That's not true," she gasped, one hand protectively covering her stomach. "You know that's not true." "What I know," Genevieve interjected, her voice cutting through the air, "is that Chloe Vance will be a much more suitable partner for my son moving forward. Her lineage is impeccable, and her family's business interests align perfectly with our upcoming merger. Chloe Vance, the stunning, ambitious CEO of Vance Technologies." Isla had seen the way Declan looked at her at Galas, not with love, but with the cool appreciation of a collector appraising a new acquisition. It hadn't been an affair. It had been a business transaction, and she, Isla, was the asset being liquidated. "So this is it?" she said, a strange, hollow calm settling over her. The shock was so profound it had numbed the pain. "You're throwing me out? Pregnant?" "The prenuptial agreement is quite clear," Declan stated, finally looking at her directly. "In the event of dissolution due to infidelity, all claims are forfeited. We will be generous and not countersue for fraud." The word infidelity, her supposed infidelity, hung in the air, a poison gas. He was framing her, creating a narrative to discard her cleanly. A security guard, a man named Robert who had always greeted her with a warm smile, appeared at the doorway. His face was now a mask of professional neutrality. "Robert will escort you to the gate," Declan said, turning back to the fire as if she were already gone. "Leave your keys and phone on the console table. They are company property." The humiliation was a physical force, pressing down on her, stealing her breath. She looked from Declan's rigid back to Genevieve's triumphant smirk. There was no humanity here, no flicker of remorse. This was not a breakup. It was a corporate downsizing. She walked on legs that felt disconnected from her body. She placed her phone and the key to the house on the polished mahogany table. Her fingers brushed against a silver frame holding a picture of them on their wedding day. He was smiling, his eyes crinkling at the corners. It was a perfect, beautiful lie. Robert gently guided her by the elbow. He wouldn't meet her eyes. As they walked through the cavernous marble foyer, she could hear the faint sound of another car pulling up the long, winding driveway. Chloe's arrival. The heavy oak door closed behind her. The cold, damp air was a shock after the hermetically sealed warmth of the mansion. The iron gates, with the ostentatious sterling S worked into the metal, swung shut with a deafening finality. The rain started to fall harder, soaking her thin coat, as Isla stood alone in the encroaching darkness, a ghost haunting the edge of a life that was no longer hers. The street was a silent, manicured corridor of wealth. Each mansion was set far back from the road, illuminated by landscape lighting that cast long, ghostly shadows across perfectly sculpted lawns. There were no sidewalks here. This was not a place for walking. It was a place for gliding from one climate-controlled environment to another in the leather-scented cocoon of a luxury vehicle. Isla's heels, so elegant on the mansion's Persian rugs, were treacherous on the wet asphalt. A cold dread, far deeper than the rain soaking through her coat, began to seep into her bones. She pulled out the contents of her handbag, her hands trembling. A wallet with a few $100s in cash and credit cards Declan could cancel at any moment. A lipstick, a small sketchbook. That was it. The sum total of her life. She thought of calling her friends. But which ones? So many of them were Declan's friends, people who orbited his world of private clubs and charity boards. They were acquaintances bonded by wealth and proximity, not loyalty. Calling them would be a plea for pity, a story that would spread through their social circle like wildfire, painting her as the pathetic, discarded wife. Genevieve's narrative would already be taking root. Only one name came to mind. Sophie Chen, her college roommate. A fiercely loyal, brilliantly sarcastic graphic designer who had once called Declan as charming as a tax audit. Isla had foolishly dismissed it as jealousy. Now, Sophie's words felt like prophecy. She found a covered bus stop, a strange anomaly in this neighborhood, and huddled inside, pulling her phone from her bag. Wait. He had taken her phone. A wave of panic washed over her. He had cut her off, isolated her completely. The bus stop had a public payphone, a relic from another era. She fumbled in her wallet for quarters, her fingers numb and clumsy. She thanked God she had memorized Sophie's number years ago. The phone rang 4 times, and she was about to hang up in despair when a voice, thick with sleep, answered. "Hello? Soph, it's me." There was a pause, then, "Isla? What's wrong? You sound awful. It's almost midnight." The dam of her composure broke. A raw, ragged sob escaped her lips. "He threw me out, Sophie. Declan. He threw me out." The sleepiness vanished from Sophie's voice, replaced by a sharp, protective anger. "He what? Where are you? Are you okay?" I'm on some road near the house. I don't know. He took my phone. He said the baby isn't his." "That son of a bitch!" Sophie snarled. "Okay, stay right there. Don't move. I'm coming to get you. I'll be there in 45 minutes. Just hold on, Isla." The 45 minutes felt like a lifetime. Each passing set of headlights was a surge of hope, followed by a fresh wave of despair. The rain fell in relentless sheets, and a deep, aching cramp started in her lower back, a product of stress and the cold. She wrapped her arms around her belly, whispering to the tiny, innocent life within her. "I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." She thought back on her marriage, sifting through the memories, searching for the cracks she had missed. The way Declan would dismiss her ideas for restoration projects as quaint hobbies. The way Genevieve would subtly criticize her family background, her lack of a proper lineage. The prenuptial agreement he'd slid across a desk one afternoon, calling it a mere formality to protect the family business. He had held her hand, told her it meant nothing, that they were forever. She had signed it without her own lawyer, blinded by love and a desperate desire to belong. It hadn't been a marriage, it had been an acquisition, and now her value had depreciated. When Sophie's beat-up Honda Civic finally pulled over, its headlights cutting through the rain, Isla felt a wave of relief so powerful her knees buckled. Sophie leaped out, her bright pink hair a beacon in the gloom. She threw a blanket around Isla's shoulders and guided her into the warm, cluttered car that smelled of coffee and ink. "We're going to my place," Sophie said, her hands tight on the steering wheel, her knuckles white. "Then, we're going to figure out how to ruin him." Isla leaned her head against the cool glass of the window, watching the grand, imposing houses of Declan's world recede into the rainy darkness. She wasn't thinking about revenge. She was thinking about the tiny flutter she'd felt in her womb just that morning, a secret joy that had belonged only to her. Now it was the only thing she had left. Sophie's apartment was a fifth-floor walk-up in a neighborhood that buzzed with the vibrant, chaotic energy of real life. It was small, a third of the size of the Sterling's master closet, but it was filled with warmth, color, and the comforting clutter of a life well lived. Books were stacked on every surface, concept art was pinned to the walls, and a fluffy cat named Pixel regarded Isla with mild curiosity before curling up on a pile of laundry. Sophie guided her to the lumpy but comfortable sofa, wrapped her in another blanket, and pressed a steaming mug of chamomile tea into her hands. She didn't press for details, didn't offer platitudes. She simply sat with her, a silent, steady presence as Isla's shivering slowly subsided. The next morning, Isla woke to the smell of frying bacon and the sound of Sophie on the phone, her voice low and furious. "No, I don't care who he is. What he did is illegal. There has to be a lawyer who will take this on." She hung up with a frustrated sigh. Isla sat up, the events of the previous night rushing back with the brutal clarity of a hangover. The shame was a physical weight in her stomach. "Any luck?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Sophie turned, her expression softening. "A few no's, a few will call you backs. The name Sterling makes people nervous. They have the best lawyers money can buy, and they're not afraid to bleed people dry in court." She set a plate of eggs and bacon on the coffee table. "Eat. You need your strength. For you, and for the little one." Isla forced herself to take a few bites. The simple, hearty food was a grounding force after the delicate, artfully arranged meals at the Sterling mansion. After eating, a sense of numb practicality took over. She had to figure out her next step. She emptied her handbag onto the coffee table, sorting through the meager contents. Her wallet, the useless credit cards, which had surely been canceled, the cash, the lipstick, and tucked into a side pocket, something she'd forgotten was there, a small, worn leather card holder her mother had given her. Inside were a few faded photos, one of her parents on their wedding day, and one of her as a gap-toothed 7-year-old. Behind them was a single elegant business card, the paper thick and expensive. The embossed lettering read, "Marcus Thorne, attorney at law, and beneath it, in a scripted font, "For when you need more than a lawyer, you need a guardian." Isla stared at it. She remembered her mother pressing it into her hand a few weeks before the cancer took her. "This is Marcus," she had said, her voice thin but firm. "Your father's oldest friend. He made me promise. If you ever find yourself in a storm you can't navigate alone, you call him. He'll be your lighthouse." At the time, Isla had tucked it away, a sentimental token from a life that felt a world away. She was in love, about to be married to Declan Sterling. What storms could possibly come for her? "Who's that?" Sophie asked, peering over her shoulder. "A friend of my parents," Isla murmured. "My mom called him a lighthouse." "Well, you're in the middle of a damn hurricane," Sophie said bluntly. "What have you got to lose? Call him." Doubt gnawed at her. This man hadn't been in her life for over a decade. Why would he help her now? He was probably just another corporate lawyer who would run for the hills at the mention of the Sterlings. Still, the memory of her mother's voice, the weight of that long-ago promise, urged her on. Using Sophie's phone, she dialed the number. A crisp, professional voice answered. "Thorne Associates, how may I direct your call?" "I'd like to speak with Mr. Marcus Thorne, please." "May I ask who is calling?" "My name is Isla Hayes." There was a pause, the clicking of a keyboard. "Mr. Thorne's schedule is booked for the next several months. If you'd like to leave a message." Isla's heart sank. It was a dead end. "Please," she said, a note of desperation creeping into her voice. "Just tell him. Tell him Lillian Hayes' daughter is calling." The change on the other end of the line was instantaneous. The polished dismissal evaporated, replaced by a sharp intake of breath. "One moment, Ms. Hayes." She was put on hold. The line filled not with music, but with silence. Seconds stretched into a minute. Then, the secretary's voice returned, imbued with a new and profound respect. "Ms. Hayes, Mr. Thorne can see you this afternoon. 2:00. A car will be waiting for you downstairs in an hour." Isla was speechless. She stammered a thank you and hung up, her mind reeling. "What happened?" Sophie asked, her eyes wide. "I have an appointment," Isla said, a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years, hope igniting in her chest. 2:00. He's sending a car." The car that arrived was not a taxi or a ride-share. It was a gleaming black Audi A8, the kind of vehicle that moved through city traffic with an authority that parted lesser cars, like a ship through water. The driver, a man with a discreet earpiece, held the door for her, addressing her as Ms. Hayes, with a quiet deference that was both jarring and deeply comforting. The building he took her to was not a building. It was a statement. A sleek skyscraper of glass and steel that pierced the clouds in the heart of the financial district. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and chrome, filled with the hushed, purposeful sounds of money and power. The elevator ascended 50 floors in a stomach-lurching whisper of speed. When the doors opened, it was not into a hallway, but directly into the reception area of Thorne Associates. The space was a masterpiece of minimalist design. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a godlike panorama of the city. A single, massive, abstract painting adorned one wall, and the air was scented with something subtle and expensive, like leather and rain. The secretary who had spoken to her on the phone, a woman with the poise of a diplomat, rose to greet her. "Ms. Hayes, Mr. Thorne will see you now." She led Isla down a wide hall and opened a set of double doors. The office beyond was vast, dominated by a desk carved from a single piece of dark, polished wood. But it was the man who rose from behind it that held her attention. Marcus Thorne was in his late 50s, tall and lean, with a full head of silver hair and eyes the color of dark honey. He wore a bespoke suit that fit him like a second skin. He radiated an aura of immense, controlled power. But as he looked at her, his expression was one of profound, undisguised sadness. "Isla," he said, his voice a rich baritone, You look so much like your mother." He came around the desk, not to shake her hand, but to gently guide her to a pair of soft leather armchairs near the window. He moved with the quiet confidence of a man who was accustomed to controlling every room he entered. "I am so sorry for what you're going through," he began, his gaze direct and empathetic. "And I am sorry I wasn't there sooner. I made a promise to your parents, Lillian and Robert, that I would always be your guardian. I am your godfather, Isla." The word hung in the air between them. Godfather. A title she associated with fairy tales and christenings, not with a man who commanded a skyscraper. "You're my godfather?" "Your father was more than my friend. He was my brother. When he and your mother passed, I wanted to take you in, but you were 18, fierce and independent. You wanted to make your own way, and I had to respect that. But I never stopped watching over you. From a distance." He gestured to a credenza, where a series of silver frames were arranged. He picked one up and handed it to her. It was a picture of her parents, young and laughing, standing beside a younger version of Marcus, his arms slung around her father's shoulders. They were on a sailboat, the sun and sea spray in their hair. It was a vision of a life she barely remembered. A life of genuine, uncomplicated happiness. Tears welled in her eyes. "My mother, she told me you were a lighthouse." A sad smile touched his lips. "And I let you run aground. I've been aware of the Sterlings for years. Their reputation in the business world is predatory. I had my reservations when you married Declan, but you seemed happy. It wasn't my place to interfere." He leaned forward, his expression hardening. "That changes now. Tell me everything. Omit nothing." For the next hour, Isla recounted the entire story. The calculated cruelty, the false accusations, the cold dismissal. She spoke of the prenup, of Genevieve's icy disdain, of her own crushing naivety. Marcus listened without interruption, his hands steepled, his eyes never leaving hers. His stillness was unnerving, like the calm at the center of a storm. When she finished, her voice raw with unshed tears, he was silent for a long moment. The city hummed 50 floors below them. "They didn't just break a marriage contract," he said finally, his voice low and laced with a cold fury that was more terrifying than any shouting. "They committed an act of profound evil. They underestimated you, Isla, and they have no idea who is standing behind you." He stood up and walked to his desk, pressing an intercom button. "Catherine, please assemble the team. Conference room A, now." He turned back to Isla, and for the first time, she saw the lion behind the man. The strategist. The guardian. "Declan Sterling owns a mansion," Marcus said, a dangerous glint in his eye. "He thinks that makes him a king, but he has forgotten that some people own the entire chessboard." The power imbalance in Isla's world had not just shifted, it had been shattered and completely redefined. Isla had expected a legal consultation. What she got was a declaration of war. Within 10 minutes, Conference Room A was filled with a team of people who looked like they had been summoned from the highest echelons of their respective fields. There was a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, introduced as Anya Sharma, a forensic accountant who could make numbers sing and confess their darkest secrets. There was a grizzled, unimposing man named David Chen, no relation to Sophie, he assured her with a wry smile. A private investigator whose bland appearance masked a mind like a steel trap. A formidable woman in her 60s, Dr. Elizabeth Reed, was introduced as one of the country's leading perinatologists. "Dr. Reed will be handling all your medical care from this point forward," Marcus stated. "Your health, and the health of your child, is our absolute top priority." Lastly, there was a team of junior lawyers, all armed with tablets and an air of intense focus. Marcus Thorne stood at the head of the long, polished table, a general addressing his troops. "Here's the situation," he began, his voice commanding the room. "Isla Hayes, my goddaughter, has been illegally evicted from her marital home. Her husband, Declan Sterling, has leveled baseless accusations of infidelity to fraudulently trigger a punitive clause in a prenuptial agreement that I suspect was signed under duress. They have slandered her, stolen her property, and endangered the health of her and her unborn child. Our objective is not simply to secure a fair settlement. Our objective is to uncover the truth and ensure the Sterling family is held fully accountable. He turned to Isla. The first thing to understand is that the law is a tool. In the hands of the Sterlings, it's a cudgel. In our hands, it will be a scalpel. They want a messy public fight that paints you as an unstable gold digger. They will try to drag this out, bleed you emotionally and financially. We will not play their game. Anya Sharma spoke up. The prenup is our first hurdle. They'll use it to tie up your assets and deny any support. But Marcus is right. If we can prove you didn't have independent legal counsel and were pressured into signing, we can have it invalidated. But it's a lengthy process. Which is why we won't attack it head-on, Marcus countered. We attack the foundation. The Sterlings are a publicly traded company. They are image-obsessed. Their power is built on a perception of stability and ruthless competence. We need to find the cracks in that facade. He looked at David Chen. David, I want a complete workup on Sterling Industries. Financials, upcoming deals, key personnel. I want to know everything about Declan and Genevieve Sterling. Who they meet, where they eat, what skeletons are in their closets. And I want to know everything about Chloe Vance and her family's company. To Anya, he said, I want you to follow the money. Declan's personal accounts, the corporate accounts, any unusual transfers, any hidden entities. They threw Isla out for a reason. Find it. He then turned back to Isla, his expression softening. Your role is the most important. You were on the inside. You know them. We need you to think. Any conversations you overheard, any documents you saw, any strange meetings Declan took, a stray comment, an offhand remark, anything that seemed insignificant at the time could be the key that unlocks this whole conspiracy. Before she could process it all, Marcus's assistant entered. Mr. Thorne, the arrangements have been made. Isla, you won't be going back to your friend's apartment, Marcus said gently. It's not secure. I have a residence for you. It's private, fully serviced, and has its own security detail. Dr. Reed will meet you there this evening. Your only job is to rest, eat, and focus. Let us handle the storm. The apartment was a stunning 3-bedroom suite at a luxury residence hotel overlooking Central Park. It was tasteful and warm, a world away from both the sterile grandeur of the Sterling mansion and the cozy chaos of Sophie's apartment. It felt safe. That night, for the first time in days, Isla slept without dreaming. When she awoke, it was with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since before she'd met Declan. The grief and humiliation were still there, a dull ache beneath the surface, but they were now overlaid with something new, a cold, clear-eyed resolve. She sat with a pen and a notebook, the city sprawling beneath her. The Sterlings had treated her like a disposable pawn in their game. But they had made a critical error. They had no idea she now had a king, a queen, and a castle of her own. She began to write, detailing every conversation, every dinner party, every business trip. Somewhere in the mundane details of her life with Declan lay the truth. And for the sake of her child, she would find it. The days that followed were a blur of quiet, intense activity. While Isla rested and met with Dr. Reed, who assured her that the baby was healthy and strong despite the recent stress, Marcus's team worked with silent, devastating efficiency. They set up a secure digital workspace where they shared findings in real time. Isla, once a passive observer in the world of high-stakes business, was now at the center of a covert operation. David Chen, the investigator, delivered the first significant blow. It's a merger, he reported in a video conference, his face impassive. Sterling Industries is in the final stages of acquiring a major green energy firm based in Germany. It's a legacy deal for Genevieve, a way to pivot the company from old-world manufacturing into future-proof tech. The deal is worth billions and is contingent on a squeaky-clean corporate image. They're marketing themselves as a forward-thinking, family-run enterprise. Marcus nodded slowly, a predatory gleam in his eyes. A public, acrimonious divorce with a pregnant wife would be more than messy. It would be catastrophic. The German board would run for the hills. Exactly, David confirmed. The timing of you being thrown out, Isla, is not a coincidence. They needed you gone before the deal was finalized and the media scrutiny intensified. Next, it was Anya Sharma's turn. She shared her screen, displaying a complex web of financial transactions that made Isla's head spin. There's a pattern, the forensic accountant explained, highlighting a series of payments. For the past 6 months, Sterling Industries has been making large, disguised payments to an offshore holding company. Guess who that company belongs to? The Vance family. So Chloe isn't just the other woman, Isla murmured, the pieces beginning to click together. She's a business partner. More than that, Anya said. These payments aren't for services rendered. They're structured like a buyout. The Sterlings aren't just aligning with Vance Technologies. They're absorbing it as part of the merger. Declan isn't leaving you for Chloe. He's acquiring her. The cold, transactional nature of it all was sickening. Isla felt a pang of something almost like pity for Chloe, who was likely just another piece on Genevieve's chessboard. This revelation spurred a memory in Isla. She recalled a tense dinner a few months ago. Declan had been on the phone with his mother, his voice sharp with frustration. The environmental compliance is a nightmare, he'd snapped. Their old tech won't pass the new EU regulations. We need a miracle, or the whole green energy pivot is dead in the water. Later that night, trying to soothe him, she had mentioned her father. My dad was working on something like that, she'd said idly. A carbon capture patent. He said it could change the world. It was his life's work. Declan had gone very still. He'd turned to her, his usual suave mask slipping to reveal a raw, hungry curiosity. A patent? Tell me about it. At the time, she had seen his interest as a sign that he valued her, that he was interested in her family, her past. She had told him everything she knew, that the patent was complex, that it was her sole inheritance from her father, a brilliant but unheralded chemical engineer who had died too young. Declan had listened with rapt attention, his eyes gleaming with an intensity she had mistaken for love. The next week, he had proposed. She relayed this memory to the team, her voice shaking with the horror of the realization. There was a stunned silence on the call. My God, David Chen whispered. He married you for a patent. Marcus's face was grim. It all makes sense. The merger hinges on passing strict environmental standards. Your father's technology was the miracle they needed. Declan didn't marry Isla Hayes, the architectural restorer. He married the owner of the patent that would secure his family's billion-dollar deal. The false accusation of infidelity, the cruelty, the speed of her dismissal, it all snapped into focus. They had to get the patent. But if she divorced him, it would remain her property. Their plan must have been to have her sign over control, secure the heir, and then manufacture a reason to discard her, leaving them with both the child and the technology. Her pregnancy had likely accelerated their timeline, forcing their hand. Get me a copy of that patent, Marcus ordered his legal team, and get me the prospectus for the Sterling-Vance merger. I want to see exactly what they've promised their new German partners. Isla leaned back, her hand on her belly. The baby kicked, a strong, reassuring thump. This was no longer just about her. It was about her child, and it was about her father's legacy. The Sterlings hadn't just tried to erase her. They had tried to steal her past and her future, and she was going to take them both back. The documents, when they arrived, told a story more damning than any testimony. Isla's father's patent was not just innovative, it was revolutionary. It was a technology decades ahead of its time, capable of making old industrial plants nearly carbon neutral. It was, as Declan had said, a miracle. And there it was, buried deep in the technical appendices of the Sterling Vance merger prospectus, a detailed description of a proprietary carbon capture system that was the cornerstone of their green energy promises. It was described as a Sterling Vance proprietary innovation. They had stolen it. They had copied the design from the documents Isla had shown Declan and were trying to pass it off as their own, likely planning to bury her claim in litigation until the deal was done. "They're arrogant," Marcus said, pacing his office as Isla and the team watched via secure link. "They assumed you were a naive girl with no resources. They believed they could discredit you so thoroughly that no one would ever take your claim to the patent seriously." The strategy was now crystal clear. A direct legal challenge to the patent infringement would take years. A messy divorce proceeding would be exactly what the Sterlings wanted. They needed a different approach. They needed to force a private surrender. "It's time for a conversation," Marcus announced. "Catherine, get Genevieve Sterling on the phone. Tell her I am representing Isla Hayes, and that I strongly advise her and her son to meet with us to discuss an amicable resolution. Tomorrow, in my office." Isla's heart hammered. "They'll never come." "Oh, they'll come," Marcus said with a grim smile. "The name Thorne carries weight. She'll see it as an opportunity to intimidate us. She won't be able to resist." He was right. Within the hour, Genevieve had agreed, her tone, according to Marcus's assistant, dripping with condescension. The next 24 hours were spent in meticulous preparation. It wasn't a legal meeting they were planning. It was a carefully choreographed performance designed for an audience of two. Isla picked out her outfit with the care of a soldier choosing armor. A simple, elegant navy blue dress that didn't hide her pregnancy, but framed it with dignity and strength. She was terrified. A part of her was still that heartbroken woman on the rainy curb, recoiling from the memory of Declan's coldness. But as she stood before the mirror, she saw something new in her own eyes. It was her mother's resilience, her father's quiet intelligence, and it was the fierce, primal strength of a mother protecting her child. When she walked into Marcus's conference room the next day, she did not feel like a victim. She felt like the guardian of a legacy. The room was set. A single file lay in the center of the vast table. The city skyline stretched out behind her, a glittering backdrop of power. Her power. Declan and Genevieve arrived precisely on time. Declan looked as handsome and polished as ever, but Isla could see the faint lines of stress around his eyes. Genevieve swept in, her gaze sweeping over Isla's pregnant form with undisguised contempt before dismissing her entirely to focus on Marcus. "Mr. Thorne," Genevieve began, her voice smooth as silk. "I'm sure we can resolve this unfortunate matter quickly. Isla has had some emotional difficulties. We are prepared to offer a modest, confidential settlement to ensure her discretion and future comfort." Marcus smiled, a slow, dangerous expression. "That won't be necessary, Genevieve. We're not here to discuss a settlement for Isla. We're here to discuss the terms of your surrender." Genevieve's perfectly sculpted smile faltered. Declan, who had been affecting an air of bored indifference, straightened in his chair. "I'm afraid I don't understand," Genevieve said, her voice losing a fraction of its silken control. "Let me clarify," Marcus said, his tone deceptively calm. He gestured to the file on the table, but didn't open it. "You are in the final stages of a multi-billion-dollar merger with a German energy conglomerate. This deal is contingent on your company's ability to meet stringent EU environmental regulations. The technology you have promised your partners, the technology you have presented in your prospectus as a Sterling Vance proprietary innovation, does not, in fact, belong to you." He let the words hang in the air. Declan's face paled. Genevieve's eyes narrowed into icy slits. "The patent for that carbon capture system," Marcus continued, his voice as sharp as breaking glass, "was the life's work of Robert Hayes. It is the sole property of his daughter and heir, Isla Hayes, my client." He paused, his gaze locking onto Declan. "You married her to get it. You seduced a woman, entered into the sacred vow of marriage, and planned to create a child, all as part of a cold, calculated business strategy to steal her inheritance. Then, when your timeline was accelerated, you and your mother conspired to throw her out, slandering her with vile, baseless accusations to discredit her and neutralize any future claim she might make." Isla watched Declan. His composure, his most prized possession, was cracking. A muscle twitched in his jaw. For the first time, she saw not a monster, but a weak, frightened man terrified of his mother. "This is an outrageous accusation," Genevieve snapped, recovering quickly. "You have no proof." "Don't I?" Marcus finally opened the file. He slid a document across the table. It was a single page, a summary of the financial transfers from Sterling Industries to the Vance family's offshore accounts. Then he slid another, a side-by-side comparison of the patent's technical drawings and the diagrams from the merger prospectus. They were identical. "This is what happens next," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You have two options. Option A, we settle this, here and now. The divorce is immediate and uncontested. Isla receives a financial settlement that reflects the catastrophic emotional distress you have inflicted, along with lifetime child support that will be placed in a trust. More importantly, she retains full, unencumbered ownership of her father's patent. In return for a license to use the technology, for which you will pay a handsome annual fee, we remain silent. You will also issue a public retraction of your slanderous claims against her." He leaned forward, the full force of his power palpable in the room. "Or there is option B. You refuse, and I will burn your world to the ground. An anonymous tip will be delivered to the SEC regarding your fraudulent merger prospectus. A full dossier on this conspiracy will be couriered to the board of your German partners. And the press," he smiled faintly, "will receive the deeply compelling story of a pregnant woman thrown from her home by a cheating billionaire husband so he could steal her dead father's legacy. Your merger will collapse, your stock will plummet, and your family name will be dragged through the mud for a generation. Choose." The silence in the room was absolute. Genevieve's face was a mask of incandescent rage. She was a queen who had just been utterly and completely checkmated. She looked at her son, but Declan couldn't meet her gaze. He was staring at the documents, at the ruins of his carefully constructed life. He was trapped. "We accept option A," Declan said, his voice barely a croak. The fight went out of Genevieve. It was over. As they signed the preliminary agreements, their hands shaking with fury and defeat, Isla met Declan's eyes across the table one last time. She had expected to feel a surge of triumph, of vengeful satisfaction. Instead, she felt a profound and weary pity. He had everything: wealth, looks, power, and yet he was hollow, a puppet whose strings were held by his mother and his own ambition. Later, as they prepared to leave, Isla had a moment alone with him in the hall, while Marcus conferred with the lawyers. "Was any of it real?" she asked, her voice quiet. He looked at her, and for a fleeting second, she saw the man she thought she had fallen in love with. A flicker of something that might have been regret crossed his face. "There were moments," he admitted, his voice low. "But in my world, moments aren't enough. Legacy is everything." Isla nodded, a final, sad understanding dawning. "You're right," she said, placing a hand on her belly. "Legacy is everything." She turned and walked away, not looking back, leaving him alone with the wreckage of his choices. Her victory wasn't in his defeat, but in her own liberation. 9 months later, the city was emerging from the gray chill of winter into the tentative warmth of spring. In a sun-drenched room overlooking a quiet, tree-lined street, Isla Hayes held her daughter, Lily, named for the mother she so dearly missed. Lily was a perfect, tiny miracle, with a dusting of dark hair and eyes that held the wisdom of a new soul. As Isla rocked her gently, the last vestiges of the woman who had stood broken in the rain finally washed away, replaced by a strength she never knew she possessed. The Sterling divorce had been swift and silent. The settlement had been more than generous, but it was the other victory that truly mattered. With Marcus's guidance, Isla had not just retained her father's patent, she had activated it. She used a portion of her settlement to establish the Hayes Foundation for Ethical Innovation, a non-profit dedicated to funding and developing green technologies. Her father's patent was its cornerstone asset, licensed to companies, including a chastened Sterling Industries, who met their strict ethical and environmental standards. Her father's dream of changing the world was no longer just a blueprint in a file. It was becoming a reality. She had bought a beautiful brownstone in a historic neighborhood, a place she was lovingly restoring herself. Panel by panel, brick by brick. It was a home filled not with the cold silence of a mansion, but with the warm gurgles of a baby, the scent of fresh paint, and the frequent, joyous laughter of Sophie and Marcus. Marcus Thorne had seamlessly transitioned from distant guardian to doting grand godfather. He visited several times a week, his imposing corporate presence melting away the moment he held Lily in his arms, his deep baritone softening as he told her stories about the grandfather she would never know. He had been her lighthouse in the storm, but more than that, he had guided her to become her own harbor. This afternoon, as the golden hour light streamed through the large bay window, Isla looked down at her daughter's sleeping face. She thought of Declan and the hollow legacy he so desperately craved. He would have a corporate empire built on a lie. She had something infinitely more valuable. She had her father's legacy, her mother's strength, and a daughter who would be raised to know that true power wasn't about what you could take from the world, but what you could build. She had been thrown out of a house, only to find her way to a true home. Her life had been shattered into 1,000 pieces, but she had painstakingly gathered them up and built something stronger and more beautiful in its place. She was not just a survivor. She was the architect of her own redemption. Isla's journey shows that the deepest betrayals can forge the strongest souls. From the cold gates of a mansion to the head of her own foundation, she rebuilt her world not with revenge, but with purpose and the unwavering love for her child. Her story is a powerful reminder that our greatest strength is often discovered in our most broken moments. What did you think of her transformation from a discarded wife to a powerful force for change? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs a story of resilience, and subscribe for more incredible fiction.